Memoirs of Sir Peter Ramsbotham, 18th of October 1985 in London. Interviewer Habib لاجوردی. Sir Peter, how did you first become familiar with Iran? And what did you know, what sort of impressions did you have about the country before your first visit?
Before I came, well, I was British High Commissioner in Cyprus from 69 to early 71 at the time of Makarios, and I suppose that was my first experience of that part of the world, the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Then I was appointed, I think largely by Ted Heath, to Iran, and I rather think at that time, it was quite interesting, that it's not directly answering this question, but I'm coming to it, that the Shah at that time was very suspicious of what he called the Arab lovers in the Foreign Office. And by Arab lovers, he meant all those officials, of which at that time Tony Parsons, curious enough, was one, or there was an interval later, who had been brought up at Mikas and all spoke Arabic and spent a lot of their life at Bahrain or down the Gulf in various areas. And he, at that time, had this strong, it's a very strong Persian antipathy to the Arab world. It was a time, and to Nasser and all that represented. And I think he didn't want, as British ambassador in Iran, those whom he felt had a bias the other way. So this is really more an explanation of why I was appointed at that time rather than this particular question.
No, this is fine.
There was another, I won't mention names, there was somebody senior to me, quite senior to me, who the Foreign Office I think had wanted to send as ambassador after Dennis Wright, who I think the Shah felt was too imbued with and identified with Arab experiences in the Arab countries, and he, I think, indicated that that wouldn't be so suitable. It so happened, luckily for me, you know, I loved Iran, luckily for me, I wasn't tarnished with that brush at all. I had no experience in Arab countries. Cyprus was my nearest, so to speak, and I think Ted Heath, who came and visited me at that time in Cyprus, suggested it, and I was offered that job. But beyond that, I had no, I mean, other than knowledge of, I mean, I was interested, I'd always have been interested in Persian literature, particularly in the Sufi literature, which I found in Oxford and other days. I didn't study it, but as part of my general education, and I was familiar with Jalaluddin Rumi and the Birds and Attar and those in English translation, Nicholson, mostly Nicholson's translation. I'd had all that love and experience, but purely as a general culture. But my immediate reaction, therefore, was very favourable, of course, because I felt I would be able to renew this interest there. But I'd never been there, and I'd had no knowledge. Correction. Of course I'd been there, because I went for a month or so in 1951 to do the negotiations with Mossadegh and with the Stokes mission at that time. And in point of fact, I've done one or two television things on this recently. There's a program called End of Empire, which one appeared on. Donald Logan and myself and George Middleton and others.
Yes, I've seen it.
You've seen that. And I appeared, they cut out most of the interesting things I had to say, as they always do. But I did make one or two appearances on that, because at that time, Stokes, the minister, he didn't speak, Mossadegh would have nothing to do with the embassy, with Shepherd or Middleton. I mean, they were cut off. And we were in the Saab Garani Palace at that time, and quite separate. And the negotiations were entirely conducted with the Stokes mission and Mossadegh, and engineer Hasibi of ill memory, as far as I'm concerned, because he spoilt them negotiations. Anyhow, that time Stokes didn't speak French, and Mossadegh had a sort of Sorbonne French of 1880, which just survived, and really we did most of the talking together. So I had that experience, and I'm quite wrong when I say I didn't, but it wasn't personal. That was a very encapsulated, intense 3 weeks, whatever it was, at the time of Kashani and all that difficult period, and one couldn't say one had any impressions of Iran. In fact, the impressions one had weren't very favourable, because the conditions were so extraordinary. So the answer to that general question is I had always had a great respect and liking for the French literature, particularly the early literature, and had this one experience in August 1951 of the Mossadegh negotiations. That really, I think, covers that first question.
Well, I'd be interested to know, before you actually set foot in Tehran, what sort of, just generally, what sort of briefing was a man like yourself given? What sort of impressions did you have? And then I'd like to ask you sort of to compare the impressions before arrival in Iran,
yes,
and compared with the impressions you actually experienced.
It's difficult to go back because they were so my experience in Iran was so intense that I travelled a lot in that time, that fairly short time. It's difficult to remember how one was before.
Well, did you come back to the Foreign Office?
I did. I saw Dennis Wright, of course, who was an old friend of mine, and we'd served together in the economic department when I first joined the Foreign Office in 1948, rather late after the war, and he was there then, and we were friends and knew each other, so I saw a lot of him, and I did a lot of reading, as far as one could, but it doesn't help you very much, you know.
General reading? Or
well, you read, you read Foreign Office files and the latest dispatches, and what was particularly uppermost at that time when I was going out there, you know. But, and of course, that was the time I was going out there, was at the time when we were withdrawing a British influence from east of Suez. And there was a great deal of material to be concurrent with and to be able to talk about. But I went to the Foreign Office school to try, and I took these discs and tried to learn Persian and all those things. I tried very hard. I took lessons and I never succeeded. Really.
How long was the course?
It wasn't. I mean, it was the one you did mostly at home, you know. It was one of those things you can't learn, not even knowing Arabic beforehand. So I didn't have much chance. I learned a certain amount. But I don't think we did. Ambassadors on the whole, if they haven't served before in that post, because of pressures and time, don't have enough time between posts to be briefed and studied. They're better than, the State Department are better than we are. We were being thin on the ground. I only had 2 months between leaving Makarios in Cyprus and something like that, and appearing, presenting my credentials to the Shah in Persia. You can't do a great deal in 2 months, but one did one's reading and talking, particularly the Foreign Office briefing on what was immediately necessary to know. And the rest you pick up when you're there en poste, you see.
What were the major concerns at the time?
At the time, we were talking now about 19... wait a minute. I suppose it was 71.
Yes.
Must be April 71, thereabouts at the time. And there were a number of key immediate issues over, how soon they came up I don't know, immediate issues over things like the Chieftain tank, which we were selling to the Shah at that time, and there were great problems arising out of that. The usual, he was going through his usual phase of great suspicion about the BBC and Panorama and all these things, which came up intermittently afterwards. I remember meeting that very soon. And I remember the first time, after presenting credentials with Ardashir Zahidi and sitting with the Shah and Ardashir together, we were talking a lot about the Arab world. I think the main problems in his mind then were Iraq, the potential, it came shortly after a Soviet defense treaty with Iraq, which shocked him more than it shocked the Foreign Office. And one had to console him a little bit and reassure him about the longer term trends. He thought it was very significant. I think the concerns about the Arab world were very, very prominent at that time in his mind. I think that I seem to remember Ardashir having just come back from Bahrain or somewhere like that, and talking about our Arab brothers or something like that, which I objected to, I remember, and the Shah agreeing. I remember that sort of thing, and Ardashir always remembers it too. And those were the concerns in his mind. But very shortly after, or even beginning then, we were beginning this process of withdrawing from east of Suez. And that really occupied a lot of the background of the time I was there, because the Shah, in his concern, didn't want to leave a vacuum and wanted to make sure that in his rather grandiose ideas, they seem grandiose now, of building up Iran as a middle kingdom, you know the ideas, and a role into the Indian Ocean, and building up on Chabahar as a great base. All these sound rather like visionary castles in the air, but they were very real to him at that time. And a lot of his policies were based on it, and the purchases he made of British naval craft and destroyers and things were based on this concept, arising out of the knowledge that there would be a withdrawal, not so gradual either, of British influence, not only in the Gulf, where we were about to create the UAE, but also east of Suez generally in the Indian Ocean. I think it's difficult to pinpoint. I mean, if you read my dispatches now, you know better than I did, or one of these young students would, what actually was happening. This is just my impression.
But with the impressions and the feelings, I think, are equally important.
That was the overall concerns. And they came to a head during that time very strongly, of course, over the actual creation of the United Emirates, which I had a certain part to play in, and we did very well. One of those things the Foreign Office did very well. I mean, we never expected that to put together a collection of little sheikdoms for which we'd had over the years had responsibility and defense responsibilities, and turn them into a little federation with only treaties of friendship and withdrawing. We never thought that would last very long, and it has. I mean, relatively long.
Yes, yes.
I mean, to put Ras Al Khaimah and Sharjah and Fujairah, all these people into a conglomerate like, and the Abu Dhabi and put them all into a different relationship of treaties of friendship and not of defense. In that area, with Iraq looking on at Kuwait and Iran and Bahrain, it was a difficult area to leave intact. And on the whole, by and large, it's been more successful than we anticipated it would. We're very pleased about that. But during that time, of course, it was a great concern to the Shah, because it was the only outlet for the Iran's oil. And he'd gone through his phase over Bahrain, which was the Dennis Rights period, and now his main concern was primarily with Iraq. And that's why the Soviet treaty at that time came at a very awkward time for him. But also, the idea, I mean, I remember him used to say, there was some analogy that the Israelis had used some bazookas to blow up something and hold something hostage. And he said they only got to have one or two of these in the middle of the Gulf, and they can hold hostage any large oil tanker, and I can't allow that to happen. I must be in control as we're expanding, with the British leaving and not giving that thing to... and we were sympathetic. I mean, I know Alec Hume at that time, the Foreign Secretary, and I mean, we understood that, because, I mean, any country has to defend its national interest, and the idea of the British presence, with whom, on the whole, I mean, he felt protected by, and Hoveyda felt protected by in Iran, the idea of a sudden withdrawal, a fairly sudden withdrawal, was very upsetting, disconcerting. And this came to an end. I'm jumping now in time, but this came to an end, came to a head in 73, I think. Was it 72, 73? When we did finally make this decision and decide how we would withdraw, with the Abu Musa and the Tuns. You probably remember that. Yes, not many British public would know about that, but it was a cardinal issue for the Shah at that time, understandably. And as he saw it from his point of view, they were very nearly in the center of the Gulf. And this nightmare he had of the Israeli bazookas, he always talked about them. They only had to be on the lesser Tuns, which was just a rock with a few snakes on them, and I think 3 Indians on with a lighthouse, which the Ports and Lights used to look after. That was the British thing. Sharjah, of course, was larger. And then he felt that he'd be held to ransom, and your fleet and your merchandise and oil and all that. And it was at the time when Karg Island was just being built up, to the size it was. So this was a very difficult one to negotiate with him. And he as so often with the Shah, made things more difficult than they need have been. But there was always a good reason for it. It was never just a whim of a dictator or anything like that. It was a real national, he represented and felt the national interest and concern. But I think his innate suspicions, which are historical and personal and psychological, I can explain all that, but you must have heard many others talking about it.
No, I would like to.
But we'll come back to that. But he, this innate suspicion that he could not trust anybody. I mean, you could be, I won't blaspheme, but you could be one of the great saints of Muslim or English saints, and he would listen and try and believe, but something would come in later to undo it in his mind. We'll come back to that. So he made it much harder than it need have been, and we could have easily come to some arrangement and settlement on the Tuns. And it went on a long time, and during that time, those many months, other things stood still, and he would, in rather his fashion, I suppose it was the only weapons he had, he would threaten to cancel the order for whether it was chieftain tanks or whatever it might have been at the time. And he used all these other, and he overreacted very quickly, as you know, and as Asadullah, who I used to see a lot of, course, had breakfast with regularly, would warn me about and help me, because he was the one who quite often made it possible to avoid a stalemate where no movement at all, and he would bring one together again. He, on this particular one, well, let me just finish this one, he was very doubtful and suspicious of the arrangements, particularly over Sharjah, because there was some offshore oil there at stake, and there was some American advisors and interests there, which were rather louche, as the French would say, there. But finally, I can't remember how we did it. It's not, I mean, this is probably just as well that this shouldn't be made public now. Yes. But the final thing was that I told him, no doubt on instructions, I must have had instructions. I should say that up to then, we've been in greatest detail as to what would happen with the British withdrawal. That's to say, when we ended the defence treaties, replaced them by treaties of friendship, how it would affect his interests, what his position would be with the Sheikh of Sharjah, whom he was also independently in contact with, what the position of all the Iranians would be in Bahrain and Kuwait and Abu Dhabi, where there are plenty of them, which he wanted to protect, what the conditions would be for the fleet, and so on. We had to go into all these things in considerable detail, and he was never satisfied that the things were arranged properly, because he didn't know how it would work out. And finally, I told him 24 hours before the date when we were in fact going to pull out, in a sense, remove our protection from the Tums and Sharjah. Ras Al Khaimah nominally were the owners of the Tums, and the Sheikh of Ras Al, we had to let him down in the end. He had a few policemen on board on the island, Greater Tums, and I told the Shah 24 hours beforehand, casually, he's a very quick man, that this would be happening. And in the next 24 hours, he sent in Shafiq and the hovercraft which he'd so hold him. They made a great thing of it. You know, I'm not sure that the admirals went all decorated the next day, as though it was a great battle. In point of fact, I think one policeman was killed. But they landed and they took over those things. And they actually, it worked quite well. They took over half of Sharjah, and the Sheikh of Sharjah had been privy to that, and she remained on the other half. What happened today, what happens there today, I don't know. Whether the Iran is still in half of Sharjah, I don't know. You may know.
No, I don't know.
But anyhow, that wasn't a very proud moment for the British Empire, but it was the only way that we could avoid a showdown, that we sort of turned the other eye and allowed him to take over. While setting up the UAE, which he then was more prepared to support, because he felt no longer threatened. He felt that he had at least taken strategic positions on that. And I personally felt that was right. I mean, that was regardless of the rights and wrongs, we were talking about something, lines drawn in probably in the 17th century, certainly the 18th century, by some British naval forces, because there wasn't a Persian government with any maps at that time. They were all British maps. The whole thing was rather historically, we use the arguments, historically illusory. And in terms of the modern day, modern facts, it was necessary for Iran, with that very narrow lifeline going out there, to feel at ease and assured about the handover to the new UAE. They knew nothing about it. So it went eventually the right way. But I'm telling anecdotes too, you don't mind that as it goes, because we thought, well, thank God for that, because we left a lot of energy. I had to drive out. The Shah was always on the Caspian. He had a palace up in the Caspian now. And it's a hell of a long way to drive from the British Embassy to the Caspian. I used to drive there in my rolls and my flag flying, sweating away, and because one had to sort of dress decently, although the Shah was always lounging around in sweaters and dogs and things of that kind. But one had to do all that. And I used to go up there quite a lot and back again during this negotiation. And
why didn't you fly?
Never thought of it. I think of those days.
Yeah.
Maybe by the time I'd flown one or another, it would have taken just as long. Yeah. Probably it's easy to have one. Anyhow, I don't know why I do it. But so when finally we sigh of relief that this had all taken place, and the UAE was in fact in the Shah, fairly satisfied and so on. But very shortly after, and I can't remember quite how, what happened. I think Iraq summoned a Security Council meeting of the Security Council and arraigned Iran as having upset the peace or whatever it might be in these methods. And we had to hold, our position in the Security Council was an awkward one, but we had to sort of hold the reins there. And I think the Shah felt once again that we were letting him down and that we didn't support his vision. I can't remember the details, but I do know all his passions came back again and his antipathies and all that. And then I had a brilliant idea, I think a brilliant idea. One attributes things to oneself which could well have come from many other sources. So let's, for your purposes, let us pretend it was my idea. It was certainly one I put forward. And I asked that the Queen, if the Queen would be able to entertain the Shah and the Shah Banu at Windsor Castle during the Ascot races. You lived in England long enough to know about the Ascot races, and remember the first day at Ascot, she drives down that lovely, with thousands of people, in an open carriage with everybody dressed up in spirit. Any visiting head of state would be at her side, you see. And this was perfectly marvelous. And I was very pleased because the Ascot weekend is a family occasion for the Queen. She goes riding in Windsor Great Park with her family, and they play charades in the evening, and it's a family occasion. And she agreed, and it was a great sacrifice in a way, because bless his heart, the Shah is not the most exciting person. I mean, his sense of humour is not the most exhilarating, and so on, and she knew that, but she'd met him many times. And she agreed because I put it to her that this was the one thing I could think of. It was a great success. It was something that neither the Kremlin, nor the Elysee, nor the White House could conceivably do. And it just turned everything as far as he was concerned. So I'm rather pleased about that. And if we had time, I would tell you what happened at the occasion. I mean, I don't want to anecdotes, but it's quite interesting because this was the day before Ascot, and we all went down, my wife and I, the Shah and the Shah Banu, looking marvellous and her gorgeous there. And there was every member of the royal family, except Snowden, I think, but everyone else was there. Prince Charles, and this is 73, must have been. And she really put everything on. I mean, the plate and silver and gold that nobody had seen had come out of the vaults. The whole thing was absolutely superb features. And then after dinner, rather late, must be about 11:30 already, the Queen led us all through parts of Windsor Castle, which are never open, not only to the public, but to nobody really. And the Queen's librarian had taken great pains and had put, as we went, in cases, some of the Shahnameh, which the Queen has, which is better than anything that the Shah had ever seen. And all her Persian treasures, going back, over the years, she'd been given them by the Shah's her ancestors and so on. And we went, and it was very informal. We wandered around, and one moment one was with Princess Margaret, the next moment with the Shah Banu, and he was treated like a brother, a cousin or brother, and loved it. And about 1 o'clock, at the end of when we were just dispersing, the Queen summoned me and said that she'd like to take the Shah riding with her in Windsor Park early the next day before the Ascot, before the Ascot. And what was his preferences and choices? I'm not a great riding man, but I knew enough about things to saying that Iranian men do not ride mares. They don't even ride geldings. I mean, they ride stallions. It's a point of honour, you see. Yeah. So I told the Queen that, and it's not a British habit this at all, as you probably know, but it is an Iranian one. And the Queen was rather taken aback by that and didn't quite know to do, because she just hadn't got a stallion. Oh, she said, Anne, her daughter, Anne has a stallion. I think that would be fine for the Shah. And then with a twinkle in her eye, she said, well, there's one problem. And I said, what is that, ma'am? And she said that the stallion's name is Cossack. And I said, I'm sure that won't matter. It was a nice little anecdote. And afterwards, when I got that, I wrote to thank her, because saying what I told you, because it was something. It was a sacrifice of her short holiday, family holiday she had, for an occasion like that. And of course, everything changed. When I got back to Iran, my first meeting with the Shah, everything was light. Okay. It's quite interesting.
Yes, yes, thank you for sharing it with us.
So that's how that particular episode ended, but it all came out of this background, I told you, during my 2.5, nearly 3 years, background of concern about this withdrawal of Britain from east of Suez. This is what coloured a lot of that period.
What were a couple of other sort of events that have sort of remained?
Well, of course, I mean, not a great, from the point of view, international, historical importance in terms of our relations, Britain's relations with Iran, was the 2500th celebration in Persepolis, which was a great event. But I don't know how much that...
I forget if the Queen came to that.
Yeah.
No.
That was one of the awkward things. Would that be something we...
Sure.
Is it?
Sure.
We don't want to... I don't know how much this is politics that we're talking about.
Well, we get a mixture, and sometimes...
That's all right, is it?
Stories are
relevant.
business to...
Yes, well, they might do. I was thinking again of the students of the future. We don't want to... It's not my
no, I'm
thing.
asking
You're asking for it, for the students. That's right. Well, no, the awkward thing was, well, first of all, the Shah had this conception, as you know, of celebrating the 2500th anniversary of the great predecessor of Cyrus the Great, who meant a lot to him. And part of the Shah was Zoroastrian, not Muslim. Part of his makeup and feeling was ancestral. Rather, you know, Kublai Khan, you used to hear ancestral voices prophesying war in his side. It was a very strange mix-up, and he once talked to me about the feeling of, like Socrates with his daimon on his shoulder, Kate, you know, speaking to him. He had these very ancient religious feelings. I wouldn't have said he was a natural Muslim in that sense.
Yes.
And I think this was one of the things that impelled him to create this great concept of the 2500 celebrations of Cyrus the Great. And we in Britain, of course, went to great pains. We had the original seal of Cyrus with the crack down the middle, on which were all the different languages, when he gave the extraordinary at that time liberty of practicing their religions to Jews and Assyrians and Medes and Persians and everybody. That was our gift from the British Museum on loan. And anyhow, this concept went forward, and the Queen, the Shah, very much wanted the Queen to come. I had a very difficult time. It was very shortly after I got there. It's difficult to explain to him two things. First of all, which I didn't explain, but was a fact behind my own instructions, the Queen does not go on international jamborees. She goes alone on anywhere. Or if there was a funeral of a member of one of the royal family connected with her in Europe or anywhere, that would be different. But to what I call, rather disrespectfully, a jamboree, she wouldn't go to a lot of other heads of state. It's not the thing she does. I couldn't explain that to him, and I didn't. Unfortunately, the Queen had also already, from a year or so before, undertaken to do her first state visit to Turkey at the same time. Couldn't have been more awkward. It meant that she was actually on the borders of Iran when this was taking place.
Yes.
Couldn't help that. You can't avoid that. So he was rather grumpy about that. He didn't like that. And then he said, all right, the Queen can't come, then I'd like the Prince of Wales to come. And I went back and I had to say, very sorry. In ordinary circumstances, of course he'd come, but he's young and he's doing his service in the Royal Navy as a young lieutenant. And we have a system that you cannot interfere with that. He's under the orders of the Royal Navy.
That must have been difficult.
The Shah couldn't understand that because it wouldn't be possible in Iran that you could take somebody out and do that. You understand it.
Sure.
We could not do it. We couldn't have done it for anybody. I mean, the Shah was a very important person. We wouldn't have done it for the President of the United States. We couldn't. He took a long time understanding that. Never understood it, but accepting that. Finally, he settled for Prince Philip and Princess Anne, who came out together and stayed with us, Francis and myself, at our embassy, and then flew us down. And he flew his own plane, the Prince, flew us down to Persepolis for these great days there, which were very remarkably, very, very well done, with all these different tents. And Prince Philip hobnobbed very much with
So you flew down with Prince?
We flew down, Prince Philip piloted his own plane down, and we raced Prince Bernhard down because they're great friends, and he had the same very slow plane, and he was going down. And then when they were there, they hobnobbed, these different tents, all down different. His great friend was King of Jordan. They were all about the same age. King Constantine of Greece, and Baudouin of Belgium. They were all about the same age, and they had fun, and they would go into each other's tents and have drinks in the evening. They loved it. It was all great success, and Prince Anne liked it very much. And then we all went off to this marvellous meal with Haile Selassie, talking Amharic, which nobody understood, in a welcoming speech. It was quite comic, that side. And this great tent. Oh yes, we'd had, just to finish this off, I played a little part with your head of protocol at that time. It begins with Q-U... Garib. Small man.
Yes.
Very intense. He became quite a friend of mine. And is he still alive?
Yes, he is.
Yes.
I interviewed him
If you ever see... Where is he?
in Lausanne.
If ever you hear, give him my regards, because we worked quite closely together. He, very nice, he said, the British, we acknowledge, are better than anybody in the world at protocol and arrangement of these things. We are new to this Western style. We can do it, of course, our own way, but we're having everybody. We'd like you to advise on this. And so we did. And the long and the short of it was that they got over this problem of how do you place people? How do you avoid putting out of joint the nose of the President of Bulgaria and the Sheikh of Bahrain? Or, how do you do it? It's never been done before, you see, without people taking offence. And so we invented a new thing. Well, it was new, anyhow, it seemed to be new. We made a top table like that. So no one could look down it and see who was above them or below them.
It wasn't a straight line.
It was not a straight line, it was shaped like that, with a node, nodes and dips like that.
Yes.
And at each nodal point was a member of the Iranian royal family, or Prime Minister or equivalent.
Okay.
So you'd have the Shah there, and the Shah Banu there, and the Crown Prince there, and so on. So you could only calculate your status from the nearest nodal point. Anyhow, you understand the thing. We got over that problem. We didn't have a problem. That was Garib. And then we had this wonderful Soin Lumiere up at Persepolis itself, where they showed the sort of the soi-disant sacking of Persepolis by Alexander, and the great voice of Artaxerxes coming out from the tomb, and it was marvellously done. And I think it did the Shah a great deal of good at that time. There were a number of security problems just beforehand, because Iraq, I think, had been training assassins in Iraqi territory to start a reign of terror, disrupting things, so that to demonstrate that the Shah could not keep security, and therefore a lot of people would cancel their claim or spoil the whole atmosphere. And I think Savat were particularly active during that time, and I was very lucky. The American ambassador was almost kidnapped one night.
Mr.
MacArthur. You may remember that or heard of that. Yes. And shortly after that, I was at that time in the summer. I had a summer palace at Gulhak, remember. I used to come down regularly in my rows from the summer palace to the house with my driver, Majid, the same route. And one day, Desmond Harney came in to say they just caught one of these fellows on a little Japanese bicycle with hand grenades on him and all that, and a piece of paper with all my car movements exactly on them where they were. So things could have been rather different if that had occurred, but it didn't occur, and it was a great success for the Shah. That's all I can remember of that, I think, apart from the detail.
So there was also a lot of security around Persepolis.
Just before, a week before the occasion, the Shah went to Pasargadi. Most remarkable speech, which ought to be in the historical records as an indication of something that is strong in his personality. And as though he was alone there, he made a speech which, appealing to the bones of his ancestors, they weren't his ancestors, but he appealing to the bones of his ancestors. It was sort of Wagnerian, the language. I wrote a piece on it in Wagnerian terms, the Gotterdämmerung and the lot. And it was quite extraordinary, and he was almost invoking Cyrus' spirit. Quite extraordinary. And that, you mustn't forget that, because that is one of the many elements of this very complex man to hold on to, is what I would talk about, his Zoroastrian side too, which kept on coming through. Very interesting.
It's a good point to ask you to talk about your understanding of this very complex.
Well, who am I to? I didn't speak the language. I didn't have Dennis's
there are many
background
people who think
and
that
so
the
on.
only way one can understand what's happened in Iran and to Iran is to really understand what's made this man.
Yes. Well, I think in the first place, the obvious thing. I mean, if I was a trained, I would like water. Yeah. One would have to. I don't know that I can add a great deal, because I think one would have to be a trained psychiatrist or psychotherapist really to present this properly, and no doubt many have done it, because it's an obvious example that one would try and analyze.
With different backgrounds, the more material there is, eventually perhaps or something.
Yes, quite. Anyhow, what it's worth, I will add to it, but I think one would have to take it from that point of view, because I had great sympathy with the Shah, because as a human being, I think, all human beings one has to try and understand. And there he was. I mean, his burden was so great. He was really brought up without any love. I don't know whether his mother loved him, but he had this lonely situation. You only got to see those early photographs of him travelling with his father with the early railways, and this tense, taut little boy, a young man, under the shadow of this figure. It must be very difficult. And the people, I mean, Asadullah, who played with him, and one or two other people who played with him, would tell you, I mean, he had this very, very fraught, his childhood wasn't a happy, easy one. It's one of the reasons why he really spent so much trouble, I think he did with his own children. He did really try. I mean, the young crown prince he then was used to come running in and sit on his knee. Or not, no, he didn't sit on his knee. The younger one did, would come to his father when I would be there of an evening, and he'd keep me, allow me to stay while he was gone. But he tried. His own children. I often feel that he'd been deprived of that lovingness, that almost tangible, tactile. People need to be touched when they're children, and I feel he lacked that. I don't know, but my guess is he did. And then off he went to entirely alien environment in La Rose in Switzerland, where entirely different. And a lot of him was European, and that was at war with his non-European upbringing and background. Very difficult for him. And then I think he had his early days when he was so-called weak, his weekdays, and then the Mossadegh days and so on, and when he left and fled to Rome and all that period. And then suddenly, and he was a playboy to a large extent in those days. I mean, when I was out during the Mossadegh negotiations, he didn't count for anything. We didn't bother about the Shah. And he was paid our respects, and he was a playboy, and he'd drive very fast cars, and very good pilot an aeroplane, and do all those sort of things, which are the sign of a young man trying to be strong like his father. All that. It's a psychological classic case and that sort of thing. I'm not an expert, but I can understand that much. And then came this turning point. I think when he was nearly assassinated, and he felt he was being saved from the bullet, remember, one of his own Praetorian Guard, and it went right through, and that you see his uniform in the museum. And I think that period woke him up, I think sobered him up very quickly. He became rather a different person. There was almost a change in personality. I'm talking historically, only from hearsay. So I'm not telling you anything which is not known, which is probably better known. It's better known by those who were there at the time. But I always felt that as a background to my own understanding of him. He had a great courtesy. I mean, he never rude. However annoyed or so he was always very polite, and always seemed to have time. That's the other thing about him. I mean, he worked. Talk about working for your country. I mean, he was just worked for his country, as opposed to the earlier young man who enjoyed himself. He worked for it too hard, in a sense, because I mean, he would find it very difficult to delegate. And I remember towards the end of my time there, I expect it was in the 73. He occasionally gave me the chance to talk about domestic affairs, not with any view of expecting any advice really. And it was only later, I think, quite late, before in '79, when Tony Parsons actually had some role to play in constitutional changes and things. That was because when the Shah was desperate and weak, so he was I was there, from his own point of view, he was at the apogee, he was at the height of his power in every way, money and power and political position and so on. But nevertheless, he did occasionally bring the subject round there. Rather rhetorically, he would say, there have been student riots in Tabriz University. There are always student riots somewhere, or Isfahan, or particularly in San Francisco, or what have you, or something like that. And he would say, why are my young people so ungrateful to me when I've done so much for them, and all the White Revolution reforms and education and all these things, you see. Like that, he would talk like that. And then I'd say to him, I remember saying it on one or two occasions, Your Majesty, it's the penalty of your own success. You're paying a penalty because you're going so fast in changing the life of your country. Westernizing in a sense, but certainly industrializing very, very rapidly. And social changes can't be done like that so quickly. I didn't say that you'd any disasters to come, but you oughtn't to be surprised because this is bound to happen. If that's your policy, you've got to pay for it. And he would always say, I don't like the Shah, he'd always say yes. Oh yes, maybe you're right. He never actually, he used to say yes, never follow your advice, you know. But he used to say yes. He would never sort of sweep you aside like that. He was a very courteous person. And very, always enjoyable, to talk with. Except when he was furious. Like when some unearthly time while I was playing tennis and a message came through from Asadullah Alam, you better get into when I first went out there, the ambassadors had to put their diplomatic uniform on to see the Shah, and most of them did, and he unbent a bit, and I was allowed to go up in a morning coat or something. Anyhow, off one had to go, and there was we never knew what it was. Asadullah would tell one. He said there's been a BBC programme or something. The Shah is absolutely furious and wants to cancel the Vosper contract or something, that sort of thing. It was happening all the time. And then one would have to talk with him and try and get the subject. It was all very personal, I think, as to how he felt. I'm not sure that the policies were very firm. You could change him a bit. And although he didn't have much of a sense of humour, there were occasions when, and occasionally I remember getting angry myself in a sort of mild way, which had its effect, and saying, and he'd already put out a statement or something like that. I said, I am paid to be the ambassador at your court, and you don't even give me a chance of talking to you. I'd come at any moment and explaining or trying to discuss it before putting this out and reacting in that way. It really makes it very difficult for our two countries, I guess, and I used to complain a bit, and it actually registered. But very few people did that. And I think I liked it in a certain sense. It was a dialogue of some kind, which he didn't have, except for visiting people. They had a dialogue on their speciality, but he very seldom had it with his own people. That was his fault. He didn't allow it. And he, of course, wouldn't delegate, but he didn't really, even with Herwald or Musica, you only had to see them in his presence. And they would work out backwards and all that stuff. It was bad for them, and bad for him. And it was rather pathetic at times. He would try and create an opposition, or get a Musigar or Mehdi Sami and say, go and start an opposition party. You can't do that, in a sense. But this was all part of he got himself into that position by not delegating at all. And he found, and on occasion, I remember coming back from Chabahar once, and we were talking together, and he again was talking of some. It was very rare. I don't want to leave the impression that he wanted my opinion on domestic matters. I don't think he did. And we had a lot of other things to talk about when he wanted to see me. But occasionally, and I'm only talking about the occasions when there was that opportunity to talk, and I remember on one when we were talking about ungratefulness and how this was going on, saying that one noticed whenever you went, even in the way out of Chabahar, that the local paper, there's a new water supply. Monarch, whatever it can, gives water supply to whatever the village is, Zahedan, the village, that type of thing. The monarch hadn't given any water supply. And I remember, I didn't say it like this, very more tactfully naturally, but asking whether it wouldn't be possible to give more credit to the local governor, or even the poor government, who got very little credit for it, or the Minister of Agriculture for these things. Everything was monarch gives, and saying, whimsically, saying that it's very nice now, for the Shah credit, but if things started going wrong, it would be very unfair because he'd be blamed for things he wasn't responsible for in the same way. And we laughed.
No reaction?
I think we laughed. I mean, sort of, insofar as he could laugh, it was a sort of. But occasionally one had a chance to say that. I'm only remembering it because I don't suppose I did it more than once. One mustn't exaggerate what one said. I think there's always a tendency for people to think they said more than they did, and I don't suppose as soon as I left, he probably forgot. But there were those occasions, and that was his besetting sin, that he could not delegate. Largely, I think, because he couldn't trust. And this must go back to lack of love in his own self. If he'd never been loved properly as a child, very difficult to trust anybody. And he had his few faithful who stuck by him, Iqbal and Asadullah and Nasiri, about 3 or 4 of them, who he had to trust because they had been tested in the fire and stood by him. But apart from them, and even them, if it had come ready to the crunch, he'd have let them down, I'm afraid. And I don't think it was his fault. I mean, I'm thinking that it was his own psychological makeup from childhood that brought this about. And that is why he couldn't delegate. And that is why he couldn't leave anything behind him, really. He didn't trust his own son.
Really?
His eldest son. He knew, and rightly so, he spoiled him terribly.
Really?
His eldest son, he gave, in fact, the Sahib Garani, the palace where I used to, with Harriman, the Harriman mission down one end, and the Stokes mission and ourselves up the other. It was a lovely scene, and these lovely, like the water carriers of the Zodiac, and these gardeners with their rolled up, carry these cans of water, the geraniums all the way down there. And that palace has now became, when I was there, the young Prince d'Héritier's palace. And he had it completely changed. The Shah told me, suggested I should go over it one, look around, which I'd wandered around, and I could hardly recognize what it was in 1951. They changed it around, but it wasn't the same. And he had every toy, little engines and baby aeroplanes, everything. So he was spoiled too, which is a shame. But he wasn't a very strong character. He isn't a strong character, and you can't make somebody a strong character. Very nice, I think. And the Shah knew that. And I think he knew, whether he said this to me or Asadullah told me, because I used to breakfast with Asadullah in that nice avenue in his house quite a lot, and we used to see each other a lot. I can't remember. I suspect probably the latter. But the Shah, knowing that his eldest son, who was going to be the Shah, hadn't got what it takes really to do what he was doing and hold the country together, was putting off his own retirement, and had, I think, decided for himself, I know this to be true. I think he said to me, or asked to do it, I can't remember which, that he would carry on till he was 65, like that thereabout, and would gradually retire, but he wouldn't leave all the reins of office for that reason. And that's why he was in such a hurry, much too much of a hurry, to industrialize and change. It brought about his downfall. His other son was a stronger character. If he'd been the elder son, there's only a speculation. The Shah wouldn't have, I don't think, felt the need to carry out his reforms so rapidly and quickly. I think he'd have felt more relaxed and able to trust his son to, with his support, to do these things later. So I suspect that was one of the factors, only one factor, why the Shah was in such a hurry, and which brought about, as I said, the penalty of his success he was having to pay. I think so.
Was there ever any discussion of, or any comparison of the upbringing of the Crown Prince in Iran and his counterpart in Great Britain? Even in this tape you've given such a drastic contrast between Prince of Wales not being able to get a leave of absence, and then your description of the way Iran's Prince was bringing it.
I don't remember. You mean whether in talking with the Shah?
Well, was there any consideration of sort of adopting the British model?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Although there were all sorts of experiments, as you know. They wanted to adopt the certain type of British public school. In fact, they on the road to Karaj, I think they built. You can see the doorposts to this day, I think there, and they for the aristocracy. I mean, for the sort of the upper class people, to train them in those sort of Western type of thing that you know about. But I never heard it said about the Shah. Of course, everybody knows the Shah's weakness about the rest of his family. I mean, again, one of the factors, why for his final downfall, that he was so weak in not controlling or resisting the, I think, greed. I must use that word for his family. I think they behaved badly. I think we all agree that. And I think that was one of his weaknesses, that he allowed that to happen, which gave such a bad image to his own people. But I'm bound to say that it never occurred to one in my time there that he could fall from power. I think in 72, 73, when he was, I say, at the height of his power, he had control. I mean, every few years the Shah would sack all his top admirals, just like that. Rifai, I've forgotten their names now, Rifai people. And they'd come in on the morning and find somebody else sitting there. And there was no, occasionally they were made a senator, but on the whole, they were treated very brusquely. And it was probably the right way to do it in that environment. And it ensured that he was commander-in-chief. Because look what happened later. I mean, one of the head of the Navy tries to seize power a few years later, doesn't he? I've forgotten his name now.
Head of the Navy? Oh.
Around just before Khomeini, wasn't there one of the head of the Navy?
There was one sacked for corruption called Ramzi Atai.
Oh, was it Atai? Yes. Oh, that was the one. Your very pretty wife.
I don't know.
That's right, Atai. No, perhaps I thought there was one today. Isn't there head of the Navy who's one of the? Anyhow, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm wrong about that. But in order to avoid that happening, that's why he did that. And so he was very autocratic in that sense, and he was a really good commander-in-chief in the army. He knew it all. He knew the details. I remember when we were sending the chieftain tank to the Shah, it was very awkward because he had laid down specifications for the tank to operate in a very hot area in the south of Kerman, and sandy areas where they wanted quite different specifications, very technical tank. And we came along with the experts from London, and he went through this great book, and sure enough, in the specifications, there was something very technical. It was wrong, and he spotted it. No one else did. And he blew up, and he would say, Father Funk, I remember him asking me, he'd say, what is the sprocket horsepower of the chieftain tank, Ambassador? I'm terribly bad at any figures, anything like that, you see. And I learnt by this time. And I would say, Your Majesty, you know I'm very bad at figures. You tell me. He rather liked that because he knew all the time, you see. He liked that. And that was the nearest he came to a sense of humour, really. That's how you... But he was very, very good, and he controlled the detail of all that very, very closely. But how do we get... Your question went back to the Crown Prince. Now, I can't think of that, but I think that, as I say, the rest of his family, he behaved very badly and was very weak with them. His strengths were elsewhere, as I've explained.
So this question of so-called corruption, for lack of a better term, has come up a lot in these interviews, and I've had ministers, security officers of the Savak tell me that they had brought the question to the Shah and asking him for some directive to sort of contain some of these things, and his reaction basically has been, well, this is a free enterprise economy. If merchants can make money, why can't X and Y make money? Or if somebody's getting a commission, saying, well, don't civil servants get bribed? So why are you?
He didn't care. He not only didn't care, but the Pahlavi Institute got their cut pretty rapidly. And Shahpur, I mean, and everybody knew. What do I mean?
Pahlavi Foundation.
The Pahlavi Foundation got their cut everywhere, and Reporter, Sir Shahpur Reporter, who should never have been made a sir, got his. Where's he living now? Switzerland?
No, right here. Rutland Gate.
No. How does he hold his head up? I can't think.
Well, people say that whatever he did was on behalf of the British government. Isn't that true?
No.
This is what people tell me. That's why he made, the fact that he was made Sir is...
Well, of course it was. Absolutely. No. I mean, absolutely right. I mean, a lot of the contracts and things that British firms got, were absolutely right. Not of the British government so much, but a lot of British firms got their contracts because of his good offices. Mm-hmm. No question about that. But to make him a Sir just for that, I never understood it. Why? Because he didn't.
Why do you think the Shah closed his eyes to corruption?
I don't think, in the first place, I think his family were so corrupt that if he really got into it, it would have gone all the way up. And I don't think that was too much for him to take on. Secondly, I mean, corruption is a relative word, and you have to see from which standpoint you judge it. Mm-hmm. We're talking about, and you're partly westernized yourself, and so you can understand this too. We're talking about the 20th century view from a small part of the world called Britain and America, shall we say, or France, Europe and America. Small part of the 20th century view about this question. If you went back 200 years to the 18th century, the attitude to what we are talking about, this type of corruption, was quite different. And Iran was probably in the 17th century compared with us. I don't mean culturally. I regard Iran as more advanced than Britain, if you can compare countries at all, in terms of culture and civilization. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about these other modes. It used to annoy me, this. It annoys me on these programs like End of Empire when they make these moral comparisons. I'm not excusing. I'm trying to... I was a historian before I was a diplomat. I think we ought to understand that we forget that when we look at the world, we forget that countries... We know, we accept, it's obvious, that countries are separated in space. We forget that they're also separated in time. We think they're all living in the same time. It's not true. It can't be true. I mean, there are some countries in Africa where they're just coming out of the Stone Age, practically. And it's even true of our countries. And Iran had quite a different history, but in terms of what we're talking about, social mores and corruption and all that, there's no strong civil service in Iran. There's no strong, established police force. You've got any conceivable type. You've got tribes, you've got Arabs, Kurds. You've got quite a different problem to keep control over that country. It's very different. And in order to do it, I don't say Savak didn't exceed that, but you have to have Savak methods, which are quite unnecessary in Britain. You have to have them there. And you ought to compare Iran with 16th century Britain in that respect, where we had to have the Star Chamber, remember? The Star Chamber, which acted exactly like Savak. Corruption, you call it corruption, people didn't have a proper civil service to walk. The only way they could get on was by having a patron, or by paying for it, or doing this. That's how we were in the 17th and 18th centuries, and that's how you are in the 20th century. And people don't understand that. I wanted to say that on the television. They cut it all out because it would have been very unpopular. No, it would be very unpopular there, you see. It was exactly contrary to what they were trying to do. They were piously making condemnatory judgments about another country, totally different background to ourselves, in terms of what happened to be a rather narrow set of moral precepts of the British 20th century. That's what they were doing.
Well, another interpretation of this question by some is that the Shah was so eager to have loyal lieutenants that the business of having them gain some financial benefits was sort of
part of it
as a token of repayment to them.
Yes, probably, because there were so few other ways. I think I hadn't thought of that. It's very interesting. I think that's probably right. There were so few other ways in which he could respond to that very natural human instinct of being recognized, of pride, of having a name, of having a high standard of living, that your children can see it, and so on. He had a few other ways of doing it. He didn't have the civil service, with great respect there, didn't give you that status. You couldn't be made so somebody or other and have that position in the civil service. And even in the services, your position, as you see, the admirals being sacked, and it wasn't at all secure. So how do you give them that? I think this is quite a good point. It may well have been one of the reasons. I hadn't thought of that, but that appeals to me as one of the reasons. And the other one we had touched on is, of course, that, as you say, the Polio Foundation profited too. So, you know, what's goose for the gander and all that, I think maybe one of the reasons for it. And people used to come in and seek my advice, not only British but Canadian and other businessmen, as to what was the going rate in those days. I'd have to give some advice on that. I remember. Yes.
I mean, it said that it was around 5 to 10%, is that?
I don't know, I've forgotten what the actual thing was. I mean, later on, of course, it all came out in America, remember, with the ITT and all that sort of problems. But there was no other way in those days in which one could do these things.
Another question I'd like to get your response to is, as you know, there is this conception among Iranians about this overwhelming British influence on Iran and on the Shah in particular. Now, hearing you speak, one of the first things you said was that the Shah, in a way, influenced your the decision to select you as the ambassador to come to Iran.
In that case, he did, I think.
So it shows that, you know, he had some power.
Yes,
over,
I hadn't thought of that. Yes, true.
And then you also talked about some of your meetings with the Shah and the fact that you had to sort of limit the topics that you discussed with him.
Yes.
And it sounded like only on few occasions you discussed domestic politics.
Yeah. And that would be true. I mean, if you asked Dennis Wright this question, the occasions in which Dennis Wright would have had an opportunity to discuss domestic politics, I doubt if they were more than mine. I doubt it. I don't know if you remember, but I doubt if he did.
Yes. Could you sort of address yourself more fully to this question of the relative influence of the British ambassador over the Shah and the Shah's influence over the British ambassador?
Well, yes, I think we're talking about two different things.
How often do you see him, first of all?
Once a fortnight. I think he saw the American, the British ambassador, obviously more regularly than anybody else. Once a fortnight, I would guess. When there were things on like Abu Musa and the Tuns, I mean, more frequently. And then I would travel with him sometimes. I mean, we were going to open EGAT, or the gas pipeline or something, where there was a British thing. I would go down there and take part in that sort of ceremony, or up in Tabriz or somewhere. One saw him on those occasions too. And then, of course, I would see him perhaps more regularly when there were visitors. I mean, the British Minister of Defence is out here, Peter Carrington, come and stay with me. We go and see the Shah for half an hour. And that was much more, that could have happened any time, depending when they came. And he was always accessible. That means he worked so hard. I mean, the 12-hour day was nothing. He never stopped. So that was so. But on this question of influence, you see, I think there are two separate things. One is the actual occasions when, talking about a British ambassador's influence, or a British foreign minister through the ambassador, there's a point in which you might say, like in the past, when a weak Shah, some 100 years ago, there might be a British ambassador who would say, I'm sorry, we have a gunboat out there, and we wish the troops to do this, that, and the other. Maybe in the last war, sort of situation like that would have occurred. That's one form of influence. And that didn't occur. But the other was much more insidious, which you must know about, which is the general belief, which even the Shah half shared, intelligent as he was, which was much more shared the further he went down in the country, that there was this curious, insidious British influence. Nobody quite knew how it came or what it did, but that it had never left the country, and it was there. And it would take ludicrous forms, like that Mossadegh was really a British agent, and that sort of thing. And the Persian mind, which is why I love Persia so much, because it's a land of poets, and I just love all that. But they're not very good in this sense, is so fertile and inventive that they can almost create pictures for themselves which and half believe it. You don't wholly believe it, but half believe it. And this, I think, is symptomatic also, and I think the Shah, insofar as he's very Persian, I use the word Persian because the Shah said to me once, I said, I'm just to divert for a moment, I'll come back, said, I can't remember what happened, I said, it was during the time one of his real hates against Iraq, and I don't know what prompted me, and I said, you know, Your Majesty, I find it difficult, and certainly the British people, sometimes reading the paper, it's fine for us, find it difficult to distinguish between Iran and Iraq. You know, whereas Persia, they know Persia, 16th century, surely going all back. It's known, they know about Persia, Persian music, Persian literature and all that. Iraqi literature, nobody ever heard of it. But it's a great pity that, and I know that your father, that it had to be, and that correct from the point of view of geography and Farsi and all those things. I understand that, but it's a shame. And I would like to have occasion when I can, he said, use the word Persia whenever you like, he said. Just like that, you know, thing. And I kept it to myself, and then I did it. With her, I never told Herwald. I did it, Herwald, Persia. He was very upset, and then I let it be known through, was it Raji or something, his private secretary. I said that the Shah quite approves of my doing this. Just a side story. But this insidious influence, it comes out very well in Dennis Wright's last book about the Persians in England. I mean, it comes out in the introduction very well there too. I wrote a little blurb on the same thing for it. They can't believe. I'll tell you another anecdote which illustrates this silent influence. That poor Nick Pay, which was so sad, little Nick Pay, was the mayor, very able man. And I got to know him quite well, and my wife got to know his wife and so on. And one day he rang up or said if I had time, would I like to see southern Tehran, because he'd done a lot of improvements there, and he'd like to take me around. And there was an abattoir, you know, a slaughterhouse he's particularly proud of and all that. And that's not many British ambassadors have a chance of going to all that part of southern Tehran, so I said yes. He said, I'll pick you up at the doors of the doors of your embassy in Meadows Avenue, and we'll go off together. He picked up alone, and he was driving his car alone. I think I noticed the car behind, that's all right. And off we went, and we went round the other side. And I said to myself, after about 2 hours, very interesting, why, he's such a busy man, why does he want to take me all round the southern Tehran? He's a friend, but I mean, you know, it's very nice, but it's not all that important for him. And yet, on the way back, it was very subtle. You had to really listen to it. But what it came to, and I'm assuring, I'm not kidding. He was really, I mean, he was wanting me to use my influence with the Shah to make him Prime Minister.
Although he was so close to the Veda.
And that's the fact. Now, isn't that interesting? And the point is that if he'd known the circumstances which we are talking about, that the opportunities for any British ambassador, and I'm pretty certain, I can't talk for him, I'm pretty certain he went for Dennis Wright's 8 years there too, to actually discuss, or the Shah asking your opinion about who should be Prime Minister, and all that, very, very rare, few and far between.
Surely.
Didn't you get that impression from Dennis?
Yes.
What?
I like to do it.
No, I know, I'm not, but of course you do, but I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything different. And yet, it's almost impossible for Iranians to accept that. And here's a man as intelligent as Nick Bey, as westernized as Nick Bey, who thought still something in him was very, very Persian. He believed that he didn't ask the American ambassador this. Much more powerful.
So basically, the major points of discussion between the British ambassador and the Shah were foreign policy and commercial.
Foreign policy, that's right. Foreign policy, commercial, and general. I mean, he very much appreciated assessments of what we thought the Russians were up to, what was really happening in Afghanistan, and that sort of thing. I mean, he liked talking about these things. He liked a global view. And on the oil industry, which I knew a certain amount about. I'd been head of the oil department in the Foreign Office in the Mossadegh days, and all that. He liked to know about that and discuss that, but he didn't welcome discussions of, and of course, if there were a Queen's visit, we talk about Persepolis and those sort of internal things, but he didn't really want to talk about his policies in the country. Unless supposing I had the British Minister of Education, out to stay with me, and I took him to see the Shah for a talk he was interested in, and he'd talk about education in schools, and he'd talk about his education program and comment on that sort of thing. Yes, different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't think he'd want to talk with me about it unless I had some visitor who sparked it off. I think that's fair.
Now, again, talking about this sort of frame of mind among some Iranians, they would say, yes, the British ambassador wouldn't be involved in this kind of discussion. But the MI6 man who would see the Shah every week, he is the one who would be talking to him about these subjects.
I don't think so. I don't think so. Depends. On some of them in the past may have had those discussions. I don't think so, because I saw all their reports. I mean, the great thing about MI6, as you call it, abroad, as compared with the CIA, although it's better now, is that the American ambassador didn't control the CIA properly. He knew they had to be kept informed like that, but he didn't control it. Whereas I'd been absolutely furious if the MI6 representative, his staff, had done anything or said anything like that which I didn't know about.
Really?
Oh yes. I didn't necessarily, certainly quite often I would ask them to find something out for me, and that type of thing like that. Mm-hmm. And I didn't control them wholly in that sense. I mean, they had their office and all that, and from the point of view that the people whom they operated with, and Iranians that they operated with in the Sabah, that all went on separately. But I used to go and have dinner with Nasiri and my MI6 representatives and all that type of thing. It was very much more intimate. I very much doubt if that happened on the American ambassador side. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It might have become so. Certainly didn't in the earlier days. So I don't think that, and I saw all reports. So I can't recall anything of substance that went on between the Shah and the embassy representative that was of a different dimension to what the Shah and I talked about. I'd have remembered it if I had. I don't remember it.
What was the purpose of this sort of a direct
I think he liked, first place, I think he liked the personal touch of someone whom didn't represent the whole weight. It was a slight facade. This didn't represent the weight of the foreign secretary and all that, as I did. Where what he said to me would be recorded in an official telegram or something from the British ambassador. There was a convention which he accepted, worked very well, and proved over the years that he was chatting with somebody who, with whom he could convey points informally. It was very, very useful. And I made use of it because there were things little things that one could put in on this, that, or the other, which I didn't want to make too heavy or weighty in a direct exchange. And also, they were very good. I mean, they knew, the Shah wanted to know, I mean, they knew what the Israeli intelligence were up to and all those sort of things. And all these different things like that, which is very useful for him. I think that was a very important, it went back for many years, the connection there.
Was the man sort of a younger type, or was he sort of the same sort of...
Oh, younger type. Oh, yes. Yes, younger type. And then some years before I came, the Shah was younger. I mean, they'd go off to the nightclubs together, perhaps. That sort of relationship, in the past.
Yes.
And I think helpful. But never was there a, to my knowledge, not in my time, and I don't recall stories of it before, where that particular connection was doing something not in line with what the ambassador was doing. I don't think so. I can ask you a question. I don't see why I shouldn't. Have you got? From your talking with all the other, some of the other names you mentioned and so on, do you have a different impression from that?
No.
No. You'd say.
While you were there, what impression did you have of the Queen or Shah Farah's power?
On certain things, on cultural matters, at one time, very considerable. And I think she did have a quieting effect on him, a sort of soothing effect on him. And it's very remarkable. If she went to Kerman, her Veda would go with her, and it would be a process. It wouldn't. She had the Shah, obviously, and that couldn't have happened if the Shah didn't wish it to happen. So I must assume that he attached importance too to her playing that role. and with all the festival at Persepolis, and that, which I think she carried much too far, incidentally. I think she must have shocked a lot of mullahs in some of the things she put on, which probably had some effect on what happened later, I'm afraid. That's a minus I put against her, but on all other respects, she was a great plus. And my wife saw a lot of her. They did together all the ancient costumes, and we went to with that at the time, and they all paraded together and did a history of the women's costumes down the ages in Persia. All those things she did beautifully, and we took, distinguished people to see her too. No, I think she led. Perhaps she was used to it, but he had his own amours quite separate from her, which were fairly crude, and I don't think she could have liked that very much.
But in the area of politics, do you think
politics.
she had much influence?
No, I don't. None at all, politically. I would, in terms of, shall I sack those admirals or not, whatever it is, or Abu Tumza, none at all. I doubt if they talked about it. I doubt that. But they had these reunions. I've got it, Mondays was with his mother, and I've forgotten, and occasionally one went to these things, and one could sort of get some sort of atmosphere. And it was all right, but I think her cultural influence was considerable. And she raised standards, and a lot of the things that she was so intelligent, and a lot of the projects that she backed were invaluable, I think, and he wouldn't have thought of them.
How about Princess Asha?
I didn't know her so well. I think by the time I got there, you see, I got there in 71. She'd played her role in a sense. I think you'll recollect better than I do, but I think from 71 onwards, she wasn't there very much. She was
in Europe and America.
In Europe and America most of the time, and actually I only saw her. I met her once or twice and saw her in America actually. I think the influences had been before, and Dennis would have spoken about that better than I would. But his brothers, I saw a certain amount of, and his brother-in-law, particularly, who was the head of the Air Force, who died, unfortunately. I liked him. He was he was out of one of these American magazines. He was very good-looking, incredibly brave, did everything. It was all very macho, And his sister, the wife, of course, our younger sister, they were very cheerful. They used to have one supper there, and they had this enormous cinema screen would appear from the ground, and it was all very nice like that, but fairly superficial, rather childish, if you like. But he was a marvelous. He built up the Iranian Air Force. He was very good.
You also the American Air Force.
What it was? Yes. Well, of course it had to be. How can you? So it is in all countries.
But what did your Air Force people think of his competence?
Oh, I think very much.
Was he as good as they say he was?
Oh, I think so. I'd been High Commissioner in Cyprus before that, as you know, and I had a certain interest in that. But one time we arranged, and the Iranian Air Force, the Phantoms, under his command, did an exercise over Cyprus and round and back. It's a very difficult thing to do. Technically, so I'm told. Yeah. And our people, who were pretty critical, like sort of saying only we can do it, they were very well impressed. Good. I think he was the best. I think that was the best of your three services at that time, as I recall.
Why was Abdullah Alam so close to British ambassadors?
That's a very good question. I think he was very close to them. He just liked the British way. I don't know when it all started. Did he go back? Did he go back? Dennis Wright, particularly, used to ride together. They had so much in common. They used to go skiing together in Europe. Did he go back beyond Dennis? He did.
I don't know. Before that, you mean?
Yes.
I don't know.
They would have been Harrison's days, I don't know, but he was certainly, and I inherited all that from Dennis, and saw a great deal of him. Although I didn't go riding with him in the same way, but I think they liked each other. I think he liked our ways, and I don't think he was particularly enamored of the American way. I think he rather, I'm only guessing now, I think he likened himself a little bit to the English aristocrat, which is not the same as the American tycoon. I think so. And out in, where was he out? In Burjan. I don't know, that part of the world is very much a world of its own there. And he gave me, when I left, one of the carpets they'd made in Burjan and all that. I think it was. He was like a great marcher baron who lived on the Welsh marshes in the 14th century. He was a kinglet, a duke in his domain. It's British. in a sense. Looking after his people, rather stern, and some people had to have their heads cut off, or too bad, that's to keep law and order, but it's fair, and so on. And that's not an American concept at all. I'm only guessing, but I suspect that's where the affinity lies. And riding and all these things of honour, acts of honour and dignity. If you like that.
What sort of influence do you think he had over the Shah?
Enormous. Well, I don't think anybody. I think the Shah was quite extraordinary for a man who's initially weak in one sense, as it came out later. I think, I don't suppose, I think he prevented the Shah doing things. I doubt if he made him do many things. I think that's true of them all. But I'm sure he was probably the most influential consistently on different subjects. And the Shah relied on him enormously, and invaluable to him, used him. And they had this boyhood experience, as indeed Sharp, a reporter, had. This is where the Shah couldn't trust anybody, so he had to go right back to his childhood to find these links, I think. But I think he had a great deal of influence. The Shah, certainly every message, everything I wanted immediately went to the Shah. He just had his ear out all the time, because he never stopped. Every day you saw him. He never had an evening to himself. I always felt sorry for her. He had a lovely home. I used to go to his lovely home. He hardly used his home.
Her meaning
his wife, yes, who's now in London.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't. He didn't. He was a very fine husband, but he given his life to the Shah. It wasn't a home life.
There are those friends of his who say that he was sort of disenchanted in the last years of his life because he had no longer any influence.
I think he would be quite happy to die. I don't think he had any other interest in his life. His children turned out unhappily, and nothing went well. I think he died at the right time. Lovely man, so nice looking.
Did you ever get to meet General Fardous?
But not well, yes. You've seen him, have you?
Oh, General Fardous.
Oh, General Fardous, who was at the...
Who was in the intelligence, now in Iran, and there's all kinds of stories.
All stories about him now. I knew him, and he was number something or other. I don't know what in my day. There was a number two in Southwark who I began with M, who I saw a lot of. Very intelligent man. I've forgotten his name.
Motazed?
Yeah, something like that. That's right, Motazed. So I did remember him. You asked me names, but I wouldn't be as good. I wouldn't be all that good on them. What was the other thing I was going to say? Something. Never mind.
What do you remember about Herwald?
An amusing man. You smile even asking me about him, because everybody does. And there's a man of great civilization and culture. But the French stamp never left him. It came through. And if you talk about the Shah or Asadullah, or the favouring, if you like, the British, well, Herwald had the same attitude to France, because partly his upbringing and partly he had worked for the French, the IPC and all that in the oil industry. And amusing, witty man. It's very sad for Herwald. But I don't think he had a lot of scruples either. He couldn't do it. Not very easy to hold that job as long as he did and keep going, with a man as difficult as the Shah. As his successors showed. Look what happened after him. So if you compare him with what happened after, someone as intelligent as the Muzagar, what happened to him, it shows what a good job Herwald did in the circumstances, I would think. It has to be relative. You can't judge him in the absolute. And he was witty and amusing. And I didn't have many occasions when I actually saw him with the Shah. I did with other people, but I never saw him just so that the two were alone. So I can't judge. I should think it would be a sad spectacle, I suspect. And because the Shah just,
Did you have any occasion to meet with the foreign minister, or all your dealings were with the Shah?
Oh no, mostly. I think the foreign minister on day-to-day things.
Really?
Oh yes. And it's rightly so. And it's unfair. I made a point of it. I wouldn't. It's not fair on Zahidi, who wasn't a very good foreign minister. He was too ebullient and powerful in other respects. But poor Khaled Bari was very unfair, poor man. No, I would make a point of telling him everything. Because I'm a civil servant. I'm trained that way. If I was a political appointment, I might not have thought like that. But you can't run a country, and a foreign ministry, which has to send instructions to ambassadors, can't operate if the foreign minister is not fully in the picture. And although I needn't have done so all the time, I made a point of and I think it's right, of Khaled Bari knowing pretty well everything I was telling the Shah. We had to build him up, It was very important to do that. That's a nice man. Courteous. a charming wife, very nice person. Oh, so sad. And he never asked to be foreign minister. He didn't want to be. He elevated to that, and then killed. Very sad. But I liked him a lot. And Ardeshir rang me up last week. He was over in London. He's just left, gone back to Geneva. I don't know. I suppose he lives surrounded by guards. Does he security guards?
I don't know.
Ardeshir?
No.
He was a character, because the Americans never seen anything like it when he was ambassador there. They never quite got over. Caviar every day, everything. Oh, yeah. Good character.
With what's happened recently with the BBC, how do you now look back at with the Shah's sort of suspicion that the BBC does in fact listen to the Foreign Office?
Yes.
And so on?
Well, I think it's still the case. I think it's still the case. I mean, it just. I think it's the exception that proves the rule. I think it must have been a great shock to the BBC when Prime Minister, whoever it was, let it be known that this couldn't happen, because it was such a. I mean, it was thought to be such a monstrous thing that the exception must be risked, despite the sort of conclusion that you might draw from it and others. I think it was the exception, and I think it's very rare. It may or not have that effect, but it was certainly not true in my day. And I was always in trouble because Panorama never sent their top team to Iran. Their top team would probably go to around the UK or to America at the most, or something like that. And they were usually second-rate people who came out, who were wanting to make their name cheaply and quickly, which is so easy to do, and therefore they would go and televise some scene of poverty in Isfahan or something like that and present it. And of course, the Shah was furious and overreact.
Does he actually see the films? They fly them over?
I think so. Or he gets or get a report on them, on that sort of thing. And he always thought, as you know, that the BBC Persian service was riddled with people who opposed him, which is not true. But those were redeeming things. I mean, those things every British ambassador had to accept and go on. They recurred, and I would quiet him. And I remember, as I told you, on one of these occasions when I felt angry and indignant and said, you really must consult me before reacting on these things, and I'll explain. So they became fairly frequent, but you'll never get that out of their mind. It's still part of this suspicion, the Nick-Pay syndrome, we can call it, which everybody has. And I suspect most of your countrymen have it, and will always have it. Even if the Archangel appeared and assured everybody that this was so in 1700 or 800 it is not so now, they would still half think that, not wholly, but half think. So there's nothing you can do, you just have to live with it, in my judgment.
I have one last question.
It's interesting.
My last question has to do with the extent I'll put it that way. To what extent, if any, did the British Embassy, including its intelligence arm, maintain contact with the clergy?
Well, I wish we had more. We didn't. And or hardly at all. I mean, for instance, when I was there, I only just knew about Khomeini as a name. And that was, and one of the reasons, I mean, this is obvious, but one of the reasons why we didn't was that, in a sense, the clergy would be regarded, if we'd done that, the Shah would have regarded that as a potential opposition to him. Anything was potential opposition apart from his own contacts. Sabak, which was everywhere, would have reported in some, probably an exaggerated way, whatever the contacts were, however minor they were. And I was in contact with the Kurdish leader who came to insisted on seeing me in my garden at Gulhak. I rang up Asadullah beforehand to tell him to avoid any exaggerated stories from some Sabak person. Probably on my own staff would have reported it, you see. So how do you manage? It's not very bold. It's not a very dignified thing to say, but the fact is that if, like Britain, we were wanting to sell a lot of chieftain tanks to the Shah, have a quiet life and increase Britain's balance of payments and all that, And here you had a man who overreacted very quickly. Why risk losing a British interest, which is what the government's job in life for the British people is to advance the British interest, by making a contact? Somebody at a time when, as far as we could see, there was no reason why the Shah shouldn't continue. We went in favour of him, but I mean the alternatives were not as good, probably. And he was in charge of the services. As I say, he sacked his admiral. As far as I could see, Sadat was loyal to him. The army was loyal to him. He got a regency arrangement if he died suddenly, with the Queen and Nasrullah and others, and the Iqbal, I think I've forgotten what it was, and I went into all that. There was no reason. There were lots of discontent, students, goodness knows what. And one of my last, I wrote a valedictory dispatch in December 73 before I left for America, which was, 6 years before he went, summing things up, in which I said that the only possible discontent was the mullahs, I thought, or words to that effect. I remember a passage, because they, I always felt that the mullahs in Persia, whatever you may say about some of them, were exceptional in Muslim countries, very close to their villages, very close to their villages. If you travelled, as I did a lot, they actually, the good ones, represented their villages. They knew what was going on. They were good people. They weren't like the Buddhists in some of these countries, just political creatures. They were good people. They minded. And I felt, and I picked it up somewhere, they were minded, they resented the vulgarization of Tehran, for instance, the vulgarity which was coming in with all this get-rich-quick industrialization. It's always the dollar and the pound. It's always the vulgar and ugly side of British and American civilization, not what you know. It's the ugly side that comes in when you drag imports in and people coming out to make money quickly in Iran. All that was hurting Iran. It's one of the oldest cultures in the world. It's this wonderful country and deep religious roots in the people, moral and religious roots. You only got to travel around the villages to feel that and know that. And here was all this cheap vulgarity and porn and all sorts of things coming in. And that must have hurt and shocked, and I'm sure it did, a lot of the mullahs. We're talking about mullahs, a lot of ordinary Iranians too, and secular people who were religious. And I felt that. And you only got to see these doctors in Tehran with their enormous swimming pools and that. It was bad. It was greed. Greed had got in, and the Shah had let it in. It's part of what we were saying about allowing corruption just because it was a free market. He didn't understand too much about that, and that upset them. And I remember saying that I thought sometime there'll be a reaction. That's as near as I got in my valedictory in 73 to say that there were feelings against the Shah and his policies. I remember that. So my contacts with the mullahs went nil virtually, apart from well, I had reports, came in, one knew a little bit about it. We never made a point of doing that for the reasons I've explained. It would be too costly and risky. The same about opposition generally. I know some American young people in the State Department have said that they should have done more of this, that and the other, but they'd have spent, there's a big price they'd have paid if they had tried. Don't you think? I mean, they could have done it, but at what price?
Well, I mean, one thing that surprised me, still surprised me, how was it that the West didn't know about the Shah's illness?
Well, I knew when I was in 73, I was one of the few people who knew that French doctors were coming out not only to see his mother, but to look at him, because he had skin cancer at that time, I think. And it may have been worse, and that was in 73. So we did know about it, but then it got better, I think. I don't know too much about that. I do remember it happened in my day, and I was sworn to secrecy about this by Usadullah or somebody. And it was because his mother was also being treated. And so was it not his mother or somebody else? Anyhow, the doctors were coming out then already. Isn't that right? Right as early as that. And we don't know what happened later, but of course, this is one of the main factors that undid the Shah and debilitated that he lost confidence and decision-making, which was only one as a young man. He didn't have a young man. It was a fairly artificial thing he got for himself, as I've explained. And that could be taken from you. And if you're not surrounded by love, which he lacked it all his life and been cared for, you really lose strength very quickly. And I imagine, others after me, Parsons will know much better than I did, but I think that must have been a big factor. It sapped his will.
what was the effect of Mr. Alam swearing you to secrecy? Something that...
Yeah, I think at the time he didn't want generally known, I exaggerated perhaps by saying swearing to secrecy, but he didn't want it generally known that the Shah was being visited by doctors.
Well, I mean, according to the American documents one looks at, it seems that they didn't know he had cancer until, he was in exile.
I don't think he did have proper cancer till then. I think he had a skin cancer very early on. And they probably cured him.
Did the Foreign Office know that he had skin cancer?
I think they did, but skin cancer, I mean, President Reagan has skin cancer.
Yeah.
It's not very serious. And he may, as far as I know, I left in 74, as far as I know, he got over it and nothing more heard of it. I don't know, but I do remember that at the time. And it may have scared him, unknown to us at the time. As it may scare Reagan, unknown to us, we don't know. Although he's much older.
I had never heard about skin cancer. I had assumed that from the beginning it was the same kind of whatever cancer.
Well, I think it was skin cancer, but again, my memory is so bad. I do remember French doctors then.
Yes.
You knew that, did you?
Well, I've recently found out after my interviews. I didn't know.
I mean, somebody else told you, haven't they?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Oh, good. I mean, I don't think I invented that. I'm sure.
I mean, this is general knowledge that
the French,
now we know.
The French doctors. But I think the French doctors were skin cancer. I think. That could be. I mean, somebody ought to check that very much. I may be wrong. Or they may be general cancer doctors. I don't know. But I don't think they were too serious about it. I knew we went. I didn't take it seriously because Asadullah didn't take it seriously. That's why I think they're skin cancer. It would have been something else.
It sounds like he had made that up.
Maybe. Maybe that's what he told me.
Camouflage for something more serious. It
could have been. I mean, in which case I was taken in because I didn't. I accepted that. Probably, I'm almost certainly reported it, as far as I remember. But I never thought of it at that time as something that would debilitate the Shah. I mean, otherwise, I'd have included it in my assessment at the end, with the mullahs and all the rest of it. But I never did. Don't think I did. But one makes mistakes.
Well, I want to express to you my gratitude for
the time
and
it is. I can't do what did Dennis do for